Okay, I'm gonna record this other video, which adds a bit more about shell scripting tips and tricks. So one of the first things that you are going to do on your instance is to configure Nginx. So you can have a look at the page on my website that gives information about how to configure Nginx. But then will come another problem. How do you deal with that configuration file? So that's what we're going to look at today. I have a fresh instance that I just launched on my AWS dashboard, and I'm going to connect to it like this. And this one has absolutely nothing on it. So the first thing that I'm going to do, because I know that I want to deal with Nginx configuration, is that I'm going to install Nginx. So far, so good. This is all manual. We'll see later how we can automate this. Okay, so Nginx is installed now. I can check whether it's running using systemctl. And yes, it's running, it's all good. So now I can have a look at the configuration files for Nginx. In POSIX systems, configuration files usually sit in the /etc folder. And in our case, it's going to be in /etc/Nginx folder. There is a main configuration file here called nginx.conf, which basically just redirects through all the files that are set up in /etc/nginx/sites enabled. So if you have a look at that folder, you will see that there is just one file in it. And this file actually is a symbolic link that points to the default file in the sites available folder. We can go there and we can confirm that there is just a file here, which is the file, the configuration file that we are going to look at. So this is the basic Nginx configuration file, which is going to serve all the websites that have no specific virtual host defined anywhere else. So this is the one that we are going to change. So what you want to do here is, well, one option that you have is to copy it to your laptop and to make changes to it on your laptop. And then in your script, copy it back to your AWS instance. So I'm going to do that. Here you can see that this file is owned by root. So I will not be able to read it as the Ubuntu user using SCP. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use sudo cp default, and I'm going to put that into my home folder, which is /home/Ubuntu. Now, if I go back to /home/Ubuntu, my file is here, but it's still owned by root. And I don't want that. I want it to be owned by Ubuntu. So I'm going to change owner, chown, Ubuntu default. If I look at, sorry, I just wanted to do ls-l. If I look at my file, it belongs to Ubuntu, which is the current user and the user that I can use with SCP and SSH. So I'm going to use SCP now to copy this file from my laptop, from the instance to my laptop. So I'm on the instance now. I cannot SSH back to my laptop for all kinds of reasons. So I'm going to exit from the instance. And now I'm not on the instance anymore. I'm on my own WSL laptop environment. And what I'm going to do is copy this file from the remote target to my local machine. So I'm going to use my SSH key. It's going to be user Ubuntu. This is the IP address of the instance. And I want to copy the default file, and I want to call this file locally. I'm going to call it nginx.conf. All right, and now my nginx.conf file that was on my instance is here on my own computer. I can make all kinds of changes. I'm going to remove all the commands in order to make things easier to look at. Pretty much. Yeah, this is my Nginx configuration file. It says that we listen on port 80. We already knew that. That the root folder that we're going to use is /var/3w/html. I'm going to change that just for fun. I'm going to make it /website. So this is the root of the website served by Nginx. So this is the folder that Nginx is going to look at to serve your files. I'm going to save this. And now if I want to put the file back, I want to use SCP again, and I'm going to copy nginx.conf back to my instance. And I'm going to change the name of the file so that it overwrites the default file. Oh, my public key is missing. Okay, now I can SSH back to my instance. I have my configuration file, which has been updated. Now it's the different one. You can see that it mentions /website. And now I can use sudo to copy this back into Nginx sites available, well, default. And eventually, we can also change the owner back to root. And now, well, we can have a look at this file. It's owned by root, and it contains everything that we want. So now with that, we've made a change to our Nginx configuration file. We can just systemctl restart Nginx. If you don't restart Nginx, the new config will not be loaded. And now you have updated your configuration file on Nginx. Obviously, you would need to create that /website directory, and you will need to make sure that this is correctly configured. But yeah, this is something that you can do at a later stage. Another option, if you don't want to copy the file back to your laptop and then back to your instance, you can modify the file on the fly. And one of the tools that allow you to do that is called sed. Sed stands for stream editor. So it's basically a text editor without the interface. And there is a very powerful usage of sed, which is to replace strings using regex, regular expressions. You don't have to use regular expressions in this course, but it's something that's always good to know. It can be very useful and powerful. So I'm going to give an example here. Let's say this is my configuration file that I got from Nginx. No, I'm going to do something else. Just give me a sec. Okay, so what I did is that I restored the original configuration file from Nginx, which has a lot of commands and lines. And I'm going to show you how you can use sed to edit it inline. So sed works with regular expressions. Here, what I'm going to do first, the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to get rid of all the commands because they are not useful. I can have a look at the documentation if I want to get more information. And that will help me spot the mistakes in my config file. So you can look at the file and you can see that basically a command is a line which starts with empty white space, then has a hashtag pound character, and then any number of characters behind that are going to be ignored anyway, and then it's the end of the line. So what you're going to do with sed is try to find a pattern that matches this exact model of a line that you want to remove. So with sed, you're going to do sed, and then you're going to type the pattern that you want to match. Usually regular expressions, they start with slash and they end with slash. And then you're going to type the name of the file that you want to edit. So this is where you're going to write the match of your regular expression. So as I said, you want to match the beginning of the line. I'm not going to go in depth into the syntax of regex. You can find that online. But basically here, these two slashes are the delimiters for my pattern. And inside my slashes, I'm going to write my pattern. So my pattern is beginning of the line. That's this symbol in the regular expressions, the caret symbol. And then we are going to specify that we want any number of white space characters. So there is a shortcut in sed to specify a white space character. It's \uppercase W. We can have 0 or more of these white space characters. For instance, here we have 0 and here we have more. So we can use star to specify that we can have 0 or more white space characters on these lines that we want to remove. And then for sure, we have a pound character. And then we have any number of characters behind that hashtag symbol. So we can use dot, which is any character in regular expressions. And we can use star because we can have any number of these characters after the hashtag key. So if we do that, oh yeah, we are missing a command. We can print using the P flag after the pattern. We can print all the lines that will match this pattern. Oh, my bad. Yeah. So here you will see that all the comments are duplicated and all the lines that are not comments are not duplicated. The reason for that is sed takes lines as input and it will output them by default. So here I'm asking to print the line and it will also output all the lines that I send them as input. So if I use -n, I should only see comments because -n will not output things by default. So I can check that my pattern matches. You can see it's only characters here. So now instead of just printing these lines, which is not very useful, I'm going to delete them using the D flag. So now I see that my configuration file could be much shorter because I removed all the lines with comments. And what I'm going to do basically is that my original file during all these operations did not change. Sed used it as input, but the original file was not changed. This goes into the standard output. What I can do with sed is I can specify to do an in-place substitution or replacement. And if I do that, the file itself will be changed. Except that I don't have permissions to change that file because it's probably owned by root or something. So I need to use sudo. So now if I look at my file, I can see that it has been changed based on the pattern that I used here. So that's one thing that you can do with sed. You can delete lines. This is good, but it might not be the most useful. Something else that you can do, which is very useful, is replace bits of text. This time, if you want to make changes to a file, you are going to use a different syntax. You are going to use the substitution syntax. For instance, I can change every occurrence of listen to I am listening. Now you can see that everywhere that I had listen, now I got I am listening. So this is not very useful in our case, but it could be useful, for instance, if you wanted to change this value here. You want to change that value to something different. So you would be tempted to do something like, I want to change /var/3w/html, and I want to replace it with /website. And obviously now you see that it's very confusing because of the slashes. We have slashes in the regular expression, and we have slashes in the delimiters for the pattern. So that doesn't work. So what sed allows you to do is to use any characters for the pattern matching. So what you could do is use a character that you know is not going to conflict with the characters you're trying to replace. So in my case here, I used the @ sign, and I used it for the pattern matching and for the substitution. And now my /var/3w/html has been changed to /website, which is useful because that's what I wanted. And I can do sudo and use -i, and my file will be changed on the disk as well. Now, this is extremely powerful. You just have to be careful. There could be side effects. For instance, you may want to do something like, oh, I would like to change this index here with something else. Then you could do something like something. And that would be working, but it wouldn't change index on all the lines, on all occurrences on the same line. So then you would have to use more flags. So I leave that up to you to read the documentation. But for instance, you can use G, which means global, and then it's going to change index at every occurrence. So it's good to use it for simple use cases. For more complex use cases, you have to be really sure of what you're doing. But this is how you can change your Nginx configuration online using sed. Either you keep it on your instance and you use sed, or you download it to your laptop and then you change it on your laptop and SCP it back to AWS. Another thing that I wanted to share with you was, because I talked about it in the last previous video, is how you can run programs inside a script and capture their output to use it at a later stage. So I'm going to create a script here, example. And let's say, for instance, that I would like to create a script that outputs the date of today into an HTML file, or into a file to start with, let's say a text file. So the command to obtain the date, it's date. So that's pretty easy. You can format it with all kinds of formatters. Uppercase F is a pretty good one because it gives you a date format that you can easily sort with, year, first, month, day. And then you can combine it with, my bad. You can use, I always get them wrong, so I hope I'm going to do that right. Is it 11 p.m.? Oh yeah, UTC time. So that's standard time. So that seems to be yeah, that's probably the date of today. So that's a command that gives us the date. Now, what I would like is to create a script that basically prints out this date into a file. Something that you would do in shell scripting would be this. That's pretty easy. But let's say you would like to reuse it several times without having to run the command again, because every time you're going to run the command and update it or write it to the file, then the date is actually going to change. So maybe you want to capture the date at which the script was started and the date at which the script was ended, or something like that. So what you would do in a shell script to capture the output of a command is you can use something like date value, and you can use the backticks. And then type in the command that you want to use. And you can go, date is date. This is a shell script that runs a subshell. It will spawn a new shell and it will fork a new shell and run that command in a subshell, inheriting from all the environment variables. And the output of this command will be saved into the date value variable. So now if you run example.sh, it says that the date is this. And now you can easily use stream redirection to output the date to a file. Run the script, and now you can see that example.txt contains the date of now. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, which is for all kinds of reasons slightly better in my opinion, is to use the $sign with the parenthesis. And behind the curtains, it does a couple of different things, but from a user perspective, it will be exactly the same. And now you can run the script again, and this exact same thing has happened. Okay, so that's just running a command and capturing its output. And another thing that I wanted to talk about was how, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. How you can work with tests in your shell scripts. So we have seen things such as if, so you can do constructs in shell like if the exit value is equal to 0, then do something. Else do something else. That's a basic if condition in batch or in shell scripting. Sometimes there are situations where you just want to test something, and depending on the output of the test, do only one other thing. So you have something like this. Let's say, for instance, you just want to output status code is 0. Then there is a very nice way of making this as a one-liner in shell by using the Boolean logic operators. So for instance, here in this case, you would do something like this. Without using a condition. So this reads as, I'm going to run this, oh, no, like that, sorry. This is, oh yeah, no, actually that's check whether or not the exit status is equal to 0. And then depending on the truthness or falseness of this, if this is true, then I will always run the next command. If this is false, I will not run it. So it works the same way as a if statement. And then you can negate the statement because not and is or. So you can do something like this with the pipes. And now it's going to be, if this is not true, then it will try to evaluate this one. So it will run this if this one is not true. So that's another way you can do tests in your shell script, especially if you want to make them really concise. Another thing that you can do in shell scripting is sometimes you want to check for the presence of specific files. So what we've done is checking for status codes. We could do things with the output of commands like we've done for the date, but sometimes you want to check whether or not a file exists, for instance. And there are operators for that. So -f, for instance, will check whether or not a file exists. something like that should work. So I do have an example.txt file. So it should tell me that the file does exist. Now, if I change the name of that file to something else, it should tell me it should tell me that the file exists. Does not exist, but it tells me that the file exists. So I probably made a mistake. Okay, that was a very interesting bug. I changed my example.txt, but in my file, I always write into example.txt. So that will always create a file, and it will always make it be present on my computer, which on the computer, which is not what I want. So let's try again. Example.sh, the file does not exist because we have example2. Now you can move that to example.txt, and now it's going to tell you that the file does exist. So if your script depends on a file that is required for it to run, then you can use this in combination with the Boolean operators I was talking about, so that you can easily exit your script if anything unpredicted actually happens. So here in my shell script, I can change my statement. And let's say that my script depends on the example.txt file. I can write something like this. If my example.txt file is not found, it's not a regular file, so this is going to be false, then this is going to run because I'm using R. So exit is going to run. Then here, so now if I run my script, nothing happens. I should probably write that's going to work. I'm not sure. Yeah. So nothing happens. We just exit because the file is missing. And if I create the file and I run the script again, it should echo. Did I not echo something? Sorry, I'm making a lot of mistakes. My bad. Yes, my bad. Shell scripting is not my favorite thing. I forgot to, I don't know what it's called in Bash, but compound these two statements together so that it's not -f, whatever, and then exit is -f, or this whole bunch of things, echo and exit. Anyway, so now I have this example.txt file. So if I run my example.sh script, it does find a file, so it does not exit, and then the rest of the script can run. So you can have something pretty good looking. You can use functions here, for instance, to make it nicer to read. A function that would output an informative error message and exit the script by saying required files are missing. And then the rest of your script can just assume that these files are not missing. So you can do -f for files, or you can do -d for directories. Now you have -d. Once again, that should not have happened. Why did it happen like this? Okay, very bad. I forgot that when you use parentheses, Bash creates a subshell. So what happens here is that this is created as a subshell, and then you exit from the subshell, which does not exit from the main script. So that doesn't work, but you can put that into a function, and then, which is what you should do anyway. And then you can have a nice to read script, which is checking for the directory or running the exit script a function which will exit the script. So now, once again, I don't have my folder, my files. If I run the script, my function does get run, nothing happens, and then it exits the whole script, because we're in the whole script and not in a subshell. And now if you have a folder, my files, that is there, my files, then you run the script. And the script does not stop because the file, the folder is found. So then it continues to run as expected. All right, sorry for the thing. I was doing it live and I thought maybe I should have rehearsed it. But that was what I wanted to tell you. And it's actually good because I wasn't sure whether I wanted to talk about functions, but I just did. So a function in Bash, you can just define it by using function, the name of the function, and then you can bunch together all kinds of commands. So that could be useful. And your functions can also take arguments. Oh, that's actually a good example. For instance, here I could do echo $1, and here I can do exit script, and nothing happens. Folder missing. Oh yeah, my folder is not missing. No. So this is pretty cool. I used a function with a parameter, an argument. Shell is very old school, so arguments are not named, they just have a number. So the first argument is going to be $1, second argument is going to be $2, etc., etc. And to call a function with arguments, you just use spaces. So that's going to be my first argument. It's going to be this whole string, nothing happens, folder missing, which is going to be echoed in my function. And then it does echo the info here. So that could be extremely useful when you're using SCP or SSH. For instance, you could create functions that do the SSH work or SCP work for you. Function SCP file, and you'd go SCP, probably you'd have SSH options already defined somewhere. And then you can use your arguments and remote user, add remote host, something like that, and then you would use that function. You would have to check my code because I just wrote that, but you could then use it by doing scp file nginx.conf, for instance, nginx.conf. You could do that, and nginx.conf, and then it's going to copy it to your home folder, or you can also do scp file nginx.conf default, and that's going to copy it into the default file in your home folder. You could also do scp file /tmp/my nginx config file. What's important to remember is that this is going to be your destination where you're going to copy the file. So you want to make sure that your user here can actually write into that folder. So it's extremely unlikely that something like this will ever work, because Ubuntu user does not have write access to /etc/nginx. So you want to first copy it to your home folder or to a temporary location like I did earlier, and then move it using sudo to the right location. But that could be a nice way of organizing your script to make it easier to read and maintain. All right, thank you for listening.